Hello and welcome, I'm Kira Scribner, and today I'm going to go through the 100 best books of the 21st century. I'm 100% certain that I would be better at doing this in the 20th century than I would in the 21st century because I love classic books and I did not read many books that were literary fiction, etc. before about 2016, 2017. I hate also that this includes a very small percentage of what people read in literature, and that's kind of what I want to discuss because I don't know, I read a certain amount of these books, and 2/3 of them are books that I actively dislike. And I know that I'm like a slightly harsher reviewer than some people. Like at one point while looking at this list, I thought, do I just not like literary fiction? But I do like literary fiction. If you're looking at books that are kind of plotless, that are very focused on characters and themes and the device of writing, like it's very referential. Though I believe it's so important to read widely and really enjoy books across genres, I almost always find that when I'm reading non-literary fiction, I think this should have less of plot. This should have less action because I just love the ways that themes and characters matter more than anything. I'm going to talk about the books that I actually do like on the list, and then I'm also going to talk about the 10 books that I would recommend for this at the very end. If you're interested in just 100 books that I really love, I made a video a year ago where I talked about 100 books I think you should read before you die, and this includes all genres as well as nonfiction and fiction. And yeah, I just thought about books that are really impactful. No matter what I say about these books, I do think that their graphics, like superimposing all of these books on a bookshelf, just excellent. I also really like that they did it survey-wise. They asked over 303 novelists, nonfiction writers, poets, critics, and other book lovers with a little help from the staff at the New York Book Review. I'm also really interested to look at what individual authors proposed. I'm going to skip over the ones that I don't really care about, but the first one is Tree of Smoke by Dennis Johnson. This is about an agent in the CIA. Very unappealing to me. How to Be Both, I have that book way up there. If we talk about literary forms and how those things can be employed, that's really cool. You have two different stories, and in different books, they're differently ordered. And even when it was published, no one knew that this was how it happened. So people would talk about the story, but they wouldn't know that they had read them in different orders. And the person that you hear first from is a person that you sympathize often with more. So I'm really interested to read this book. It's on my shelf. It is Bel Canto by Anne Patchett. I plan to read Tom Lake and The Dutch House at some point, and then depending on how much I like those books, I will go back to this book. I've heard that it's kind of problematic because it appears in South America and it's very interested on everything that happens to white people, and the people that are actually South American are just kind of background characters and servants that get very little impact on the fact that there's tragedy going on. The next book is the first memoir on the list. It's called Men We Reaped by Jasmine Ward. I'm interested in reading her books in general, and I also like that this book looks at different forces of the elegy of 5 young Black men and how they ultimately die. And do I think I will ever get to this book? Maybe not, but I would definitely be interested in the themes. I am so bad at putting nonfiction books off for so long. Similar thoughts about Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments. It looks at the laws that governed young women, especially Black women in the early 20th century, how like anything could really lead them to be locked up in a wayward girls' asylum and kind of what happened from there. Very, very interesting. I would love to read this book at some point. The next book is Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. I have read the first book, but I have not read this one yet, but I will talk about the first book a little bit later, but this is a book I want to read. The next book is On Beauty by Zadie Smith, and this is a retelling of Howard's End, a book that I really, really want to read. I watched the movie and have read other E.M. Forster and really, really loved his book, so I'm very excited to pick this book up at some point in the future. The next book is Station 11 at 93 in the first book that I read. I think it's wonderful. It's post-apocalyptic and has Shakespearean characters walking around and talks about hope and stuff, and it's just really lovely. The next book is my most recent read on this list, and it is The Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante. I really liked the beginning of this book, and then it felt like it dragged on for so long, and I kind of lost interest in it. It talks about abandonment of this woman whose husband has an affair with a younger woman, and she's left to take care of her children, and she kind of goes insane a little bit. There's a lot of themes of like women and just like unmooring in literature sometimes, and I'm like, I guess it's just not a very appealing point of view for me. There's a lot of poking and blood and other things that I'm like, okay, cool. The next book is The Human Stain by Philip Roth, and I will run with a 10-foot pole. I will not be reading any Philip Roth. The Sympathizer, this is a book that is kind of on my maybe list. It is about a North Vietnamese spy at Saigon Falls. It's interesting. It's been on my list for a long time. I believe it won a Pulitzer Prize. Am I hopeful that I will one day get to it? Yes. Do I think that that might not ever happen? I think that it might not ever happen. The next book is The Return by Hashem Matter. I'm really excited to read his new novel, My Friends, as well as his backlisted books, but this is a memoir, and I feel like I'm going to be less interested in the subject as a memoir. The Collected Stories of Lydia Davis. These are micro stories, and they're very appealing to me. I love short stories, and I love what you can do in such few words. Be Transition Baby by Tori Peters. At one point I was planning on reading this. I'm probably not going to read it now. The biography of Frederick Douglass. This is a book that when I thought it was his narrative life, I was going to click, yes, I want to read it because it's on my shelf up there. Pastoralia by George Saunders. George Saunders makes so much presence on this list, and the one book that I read, which is beloved by everyone, not a big fan at all. Empire of Maladies, a biography of cancer. If I read more nonfiction like this, I could be tempted to read it. My roommate, who is a pharmacist, has it on our shelf, but I'm probably never going to read this. When We Cease to Understand the World, this is a book that I've had out from the library so many times. I'm really interested in the ways that it intersects with World War I and gas and mustard gas, how experiments become things of death. I think it would be really interesting to read. Hurricane Season is a book that I'd never heard about, and I was interested when I first read about it, and then it talks about sexual assault, and I was like, well, actually, probably not. Pulphead Essays, this is kind of looking back at the era of pulphead, like magazines, stuff like that. It's interesting in theory, but it's not a book that I would definitely go to at all. Elena Ferrante's The Story of the Lost Child. This is a fourth book in a series, and a series I do plan to read, so if I like the series, I will hopefully read this book someday. A Manual for Cleaning Women by Lucia Berlin. It is a book that was not published in the 21st century and has nothing to do with the 21st century. It was written between the 1960s and 1990s. It's about this careworn, haunted, messily alluring, yet casually droll short stories. Like, it sounds amazing, and I think that it's so beautiful to represent like the unseen labor and like that experience. And I do want to read it. I don't think it belongs on the list because even though it was collected in 2015, it's not part of the 21st century literature. We have The Septology by John Fosse, translated by Damien Searles. This is not a book. I have heard about it and I have looked it up before and I'm like, no. This is not the kind of literature that I go toward. We have An American Marriage by Terry Jones. I was so excited for this book. I thought it was going to be a favorite. I did not like this. I think I just really didn't like the writing style. I felt very distanced from the characters, even though I had a lot of empathy for what they're going, because it is a man who was wrongfully imprisoned, and thus him and his wife have like this huge separation, and it's talking about the criminalization of Black people and how that impacts family systems and like intimacy and all of these things, because when you have people being pulled out, and even if it's overturned or anything like that, it just leaves these scars in someone's family. And I think that's really important. I just didn't enjoy reading the book or really connect with the characters. If you want a brilliant book that deals with the same subject like 40 years earlier, I cannot recommend If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin anymore. Like, it is such an incredible book. One of the first lines is that no one should ever see their loved ones through glass. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. Will I read this book? I don't know. I really don't know. It's so popular. It doesn't feel like it's my kind of book, but maybe. Okay, a book I can finally stand behind is Exit West by Moshe Hamad. I love this book, and I read it twice, and I read it twice before I knew that it had like any real like literary zenithness, but my goodness, I love the way that it pieces all of these people's stories together and deals with the refugee crisis and the experience of like racism and like America coming in and upsetting everything in one's country and then trying to get to America and how that impacts relationships. It is so well written. I think it's excellent. Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout. I have read her other book, Lucy Barton, as well as the two sequels. I have a lot of like for it and a lot of dislike for it at the same time. I feel very medium about it. I kind of half plan on reading Olive Kitteridge at some point, but I don't really know when that is going to be or if ever. The Years of Lyndon Johnson, The Passage of Power. No, I'm not American. And yeah, you can really tell that this was collected by Americans sometimes. We have Secondhand Time, The Last of the Soviets. It's also a book that doesn't really interest me. We have the Copenhagen Trilogy, a book that I'm really excited to read. I have it on my list to read this year. It was not written in the 20th century at all. It was translated in 2021, but it was written in the 1960s and has been popular in Denmark for years. So why the heck is this on this list? It doesn't make sense at all. It feels very Anglo-centric to think that a book that has been popular for over 70 years is somehow part of the canon now just because it's being translated to English. Like, it just, not my vibe at all. And we have All Aunt Hagar's Children, and this is interesting in theory. I was really interested in the way that it talked about 14 interconnected stories of disparate in both tone and direction, and his tales of the 20th century Black life in and around Washington, D.C. And then it started talking about magical realism and meeting the devil, and I was like, actually, how about no? That does not feel appealing anymore. The New Jim Crow, this is a book that I've been wanting to read for a very long time. I'm really bad at reading nonfiction, as I said, but I definitely had it out from the library and had plans. The Friends by Sigrun Nuez. This is an author that, like, I don't know, it just doesn't appeal to me for some reason, even though I know that they are very popular. Far from the Tree, Parents, Children, and the Search for Identity. Another nonfiction book that doesn't really interest me. We the Animals. It is a book that seems like it could be interesting. I like that it's tracing coming of age of 3 mixed race brothers in a derelict upstate New York town. Like, it seems like it could be appealing. I've never heard about it. Plot Against America by Philip Roth. No, thank you. The Great Believers by Rebecca Mackay. This is an author that became very prominent this year based on her newer novel, and this is a book I've heard great things about. I could be convinced to read it. I don't have any real desire to read it at the time. We have Veronica by Mary Gateskill, and another book that I don't have really any interest in. It just doesn't strike anything to me. We have 10:04, another book that I'm just like, no interest. We have Demon Copperhead, the book that everyone loves that I just don't. I have a book review that I talk in depth about my critiques right after it won the Pulitzer Prize last year. We have Heavy, another book that doesn't really interest me. We have Middlesex, which feels like a book that has been outdated for a long time to be on this list. We have Stay True. I have been really interested in this book. It is about 2 friends, and one of them has passed away and one of them is writing a memoir. It seems like it would be totally up my aisle. We have Nickel and Dimed and Not Getting By in America. This is a book that is on the surface I am interested in. The fact that it came out in 2001 makes me think that it is a book that would not be very relevant to now. We have The Flamethrowers, and this is a book that I did not even look at because it said motorcycle racing across Utah, and I said no. We have The Looming Tower, another book that I don't think I'm interested in at all. We have The 10th of December, another George Saunders. I don't think he deserves all this space on the list, especially since I think people that even loved him did not primarily like the book very much, so who knows. We have Alice Munro's Runaway. These were short stories that I really liked. I really like the way that she writes. I love the Ontario Gothic kind of writing where it seems like everything's all right, but there's lots of things going under. There's no magic or fabulism specifically, but it does have a lot of interesting themes and stories and people's point of view. And I could just relate to the little things that these characters did and felt. So yeah, I read it several years ago and I would like to reread it at some point probably. We have Dennis Johnson's Train Dreams, and I would have probably passed it off normally, but Greg from Supposedly Fun did a wonderful deep dive into this book, and it definitely made me interested in reading it. We have Life After Life, another book that just doesn't really appeal to me. We have Trust by Hernan Diaz, a book that I adore and love and plays with like literary telling and the way that stories are told so well. I hate that it gets so much slack from people who love Demon Copperhead so much more. Anyways, I have feelings and I just think this is excellent. This made my top 100 books. We have The Vegetarian by Han Kang. This is a Korean translated book that I've been interested in reading a long time. It's about a woman who completely gives up meat, and the people in her life tell her story and how they are upset by her kind of breaking from the rules. We have Persepolis, another book that I've been really considering reading lately. I just read Mouse by Ark Spiegelman. They're kind of in the same group of early graphic novels that received wide acclaim. We have A Mercy by Toni Morrison. I read this way back and I didn't get very much from it, but I would like to reread it now that I'm a little older. The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. This is a book that I was vaguely interested in, and then I started The Secret History and I did not like it and I DNF'd it, so probably not for either of them. They are long and don't feel worth it. We have The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson. She has Bluets, which I am interested in reading at some point, and if I like that, I may read this. We have The Fifth Season. Right here, yeah. Great book. I love that this, I think, is the only sci-fi book on this list, and I think that is well deserved. It has a lot of interesting things. I want to reread it and then continue on with the series. We have Post-War History of Europe since 1945. This is another book. It was published in 2005. It feels like it might be a little outdated. A Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James. I'm interested in this, except for it is massive. It is a mammoth. And I tried reading one of his other mammoths and did not like them. So the subject matter interests me, the author less so. We have Small Things Like These, my short and sweet books. I read this twice. I really like it. I think it's an excellent book. We have H is for Hawk. And this is a book I still don't really know that much about. I think it's just a woman birdwatching, but I'll probably never read it. We have A Visit from the Goon Squad. This is a book that I do hope to read at some point. I like that it's experimental. It has kind of interconnected short stories. Savage Detectives. I am biased against detective anything. I saw that and went, no thank you. We have The Years by Annie Arnaud. I am really interested in reading this. I have had it out from the library before. It is translated from the French. She won a Nobel Prize a year or two ago. So Between the World and Me. I'm always slightly bitter because I'm very competitive and I want to read all the books. And I've read his other book, We Were 8 Years in Power, but it's always the one that's included when we talk about his books. And I'm like, no, I have read him, just not this one. Anyways, I like that book. Like, some of the essays I really loved and some of the essays I did not like, but yeah, I am interested in reading this book sometime. We have Fun House by Alison Bechdel. This is about a girl growing up in a funeral home. It is another graphic novel, and I am interested in reading this at some point. We have Citizen, another book that I have gotten out so many times. It's so hard to like be in the correct mood for poetry. Like, I love poetry, but it really comes and goes on when I want to read it. So we have Savage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward, a book that I'm really excited to read at some point. We have The Line of Beauty, a book that I'm not interested in reading at all. We have White Teeth by Zadie Smith. I would have said until recently that this is a book that I'm very excited to read. I talked about On Beauty earlier, and I thought that I would always like Zadie Smith, but my library doesn't have all of them. And yet, I read, why am I forgetting the book title? I read a book that was historical fiction from her last year that was a new release, and I did not like it. So I'm like, and particularly I did not like the writing. The writing and the characters and all of it felt undeveloped and terrible. So no offense, I know she's very well loved, and I want to read the one about Howard's End. And then I will consider if I want to read more of her books. We have Sing Unburied Sing, another Jesmyn Ward, and I would definitely like to read it, especially if I like her other books. The Last Samurai by Helen DeWitt. I did not know that this was a fiction book for a really long time. Whenever I saw it in thrift shops, I thought that it was a nonfiction. We have Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, and that's I'm not interested. We have Americana, a book that has been on my list for so long. I don't know if I'll ever read it. We have Atonement by Ian McEwan. And this is a book I did not like. Another book I just like, I was so uninterested and I felt very undeveloped. And then recently, I was looking at something and I realized that I accidentally read the abridged version. I think the abridged version was like 6 hours or something like that, so it wasn't short. But I saw something and I saw it as like a longer audiobook and I went, wait, how long is it supposed to be? So I am interested in possibly rereading it at some point. It's a book that deals with such a sensitive topic, and I didn't love the way that they dealt with it, like the framing of it. Yeah. And I watched the movie, and I also was not a big fan of that, so I don't know. I don't know if I'll actually reread it. We have Random Family, another book I don't know anything about, and I'm not super interested in. We have The Overstory. I read Bewilderment by him. It was bad. I did not like it. We have Hateship, Friendship, Courtship, Loveship, and Marriage. I think that might even be up there somewhere. This is by Alice Munro. I do hope to read these short stories at some point, as I liked her other book, Runaway. Behind the Beautiful Forevers. Whenever I see this and like see kind of the thought that it talks about like Slumdog Millionaire, it just feels like it's like captivating on like the ways that some people like look down on people that are not white and like kind of romanticize their like poverty and like other things. And maybe that's not true. Maybe it's just how I've heard this book talked about. We have Evicted, and it's a book that is being very much in the limelight lately, and I would love to read it if it was about Canada. The thing is about like reading books that are so much about laws and systems that are American, it just feels hard and kind of confusing because like I do care about these things. I care about these things in Canada where I live and where it affects the people around me. I don't really have an invested interest in understanding the systems of America. And yeah, I care about the themes, but things are so different. Even like healthcare and just the general attitude to many of these things are wildly different. So it just feels kind of like I'm in an uncanny valley of reading things that are similar to some things, but also so different. We have Erasure by Percival Everett. This is a book that I do hope to read this year. I like that it's being adapted into a book called American Fiction, and even before that, I was interested in this. So yes, very hopeful that I will read this and I would like it. We have Say Nothing, and this is a true story of murder and memory in Northern Ireland. I have something to admit, which is this whole time I've seen this cover before, I've always thought it was JFK, like silhouetted. And only now did I realize when it said Ireland, and I went, like, the Kennedys I think are Irish, but I don't think this is about the Kennedy assassination. Again, like political kind of, like this kind of stuff is not necessarily my cup of tea. We have Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders, a book I hated so much. It like felt like actual torture to get through. I know it's so well loved. There's just like a sexually charged / misogynistic vibe to it that I really didn't like. We have The Sellout by Paul Beatty, and I think this won a Pulitzer Prize. I don't know that much about it. The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. And I think separate from all of these things, I would be interested in this book because I love comics, I love superheroes, and it is taking some aspects on it. But I read another Michael Chabon book, and it was awful. Gentleman of the Road. It was so sexist. It was terrible. It was badly written. I just did not like the experience at all, and that was years ago. So it's kind of always put me off from reading this book ever since. We have Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, and this is on my bookshelf out there in the hall, and if it wasn't so large, I would have already read it, but I am intimidated by large books often. We have Outline by Rachel Cusk, another book I did not like. I was so bored, and also just like uninterested, and also she just was saying, like, the way that people were described were just always so grimy, I guess, like, feels the right word. Like, I think I just look at people and I assume the best in them generally, and I get very frustrated when books are very concerned at how people are kind of the worst. Like, I don't mind unlikable characters, I don't like people that are selfish, but within their selfishness, I like to also see good. And this book just felt like it was reading a bunch of people that were horrendous, and like she's kind of watching people by, and she kind of is invisible, and people don't really, like, they look at her as a confessor, but she's not really a main character. I just wish there was some element of like hope and like belief in people in general. I just think like there's a nihilism in this book, and maybe that's my own kind of interpretation of it. We have The Road. This is a book that I wanted to read since I saw a presentation on it in grade 10 English. So that was a long time ago, and hopefully I will read it. It is a father-son story set during the apocalypse. The Year of Magical Thinking, and this is a book that has been out from my library recently, like within the last 2 weeks. It's the story of Joan after her husband died, and all these little things that she's trying to do because she believes if she does them that her husband will return. And as someone who's been dealing with a fair bit of grief recently, I do think that it's a book that would be helpful and interesting and emotional for me to read. We have The Brief and Wonderful Life of Oscar Wilde, and this is a book that for a long time was appealing to me. And then I've kind of heard the way that people talk about it, and that, again, it's kind of just gross and sexualizing people. And I think there's also things that have come out about the author that are not the most appealing to me. So yeah, generally not interested in reading this book. Gilead. And this is a book that I bought last summer, and I do plan on reading sometime. I'm interested in reading this. I started Housekeeping by her, which is a book that came out about 25 years earlier, and I DNF'd it. It wasn't bad, I just wasn't hooked, and I don't think I was in the right reading time for it. We have Never Let Me Go. Another book I did not like. And I know that this is blasphemy. This is a very well-loved book. And I did love Clara and the Sun by the same author, and it was great. I just didn't like this book, and I also knew the spoiler, I knew the twist, so maybe that was unappealing to me. I know that this is a very, very popular book. It's at number 9 on the best books of the 21st century. We have Austerlitz, which seems like a nonfiction book that I'm not very interested in. We have The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. I think because of how popular he is, I kind of undermine myself and don't read it. I get like too hyped up, and then I don't read books I'm excited for. 2666, a book I've never heard about and is very long, does not appeal to me. We have Jonathan Franzen's The Corrections. Everything I've heard about this author and the way that he writes does not feel like it would be good. Also, the first line is, with its satirical take on mental health. No. Like, not that I think that mental health can be satirized. I just think often when it is, it's not done well. We have The Known World by Edward P. Jones. I was very surprised that this was number 4 because it's not a book that I've heard about, but it is about a black farmer, bookmaker, and former slave named Henry Townsend. It is a book that I've never heard about, but theme-wise, I think it's great. We have Wolf Hall, a book I have read, and I'm very excited to talk about. I do want to reread it because it is dense, but I love the Tudor court, and this was brilliantly well done and had many characters I thought about, and I'm really excited to continue. We have The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabella Wilkerson. This is a book that I am so excited to read because it's about the migration in America, and I love like nonfiction in this book, and like The Warmth of Other Suns just, I think, perfectly captures kind of the promise of Black people during this era where they were going to go to a place that had less racial hate and more opportunities and all of these things, and how it actually turned out. So I'm really interested in reading this. I own Cast, and it's somewhere around here. And then, surprise, surprise, the top book is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, which does feel shocking. Like, it's very popular, but it doesn't feel like the best. But I think a lot of people, people aren't saying that this is the best book. It's just appeared on the most lists. So what I read in the end was 15 books out of 100, which is very surprising. And then I want to read about 26 of them. Out of the 15 that I read, there's 2 I would definitely put on my list of 100 books for the 21st century, and that is Exit West and Trust. Excellent, excellent books. The book that I'm most shocked did not make this is The Kite Runner by Clive Sweeney. Such an epic and amazing book, and like, I don't know many people who read it and not being impacted by it. In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, just epic, wonderful, right here, interacts with Bluebeard and other gothic tropes that kind of deal with abuse, and it is written so well. For a biography that I think is excellent is On Her Own Ground, The Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker. I think it's epic. It was really well done. We have Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson, a memoir in verse about a young black girl in Brooklyn. It also interacts what is happening historically during the 1960s and as she grows up. We have My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. It takes on Lolita and other grooming stories and kind of turns them on the head and examines the way that we think that we're not abused and the ways that we are, and kind of talks about the after effects of abuse on people's lives. We have Butter, Honey, Pig Bread, which is one of the best books that I've read in the last 5 years. It's a sister tale and kind of looks at all of these elements and the ways that relationships and secrets and family all intersect with each other. We have The Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King that takes an account of Indigenous people and the impact that the Canadian and American governments have had on them, and just the ways that racism props up and continues on. It has a lot of humor, which makes it very readable, but also sheds light on the many injustices. We have How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith, and it talks about the legacy of slavery in America. We have Wandering Souls by Cecile Pin, which is great. It takes place after the Vietnam War. We have 3 siblings that are orphaned during the passage over to Britain and their experience in refugee camps, and just the racism and impact of this war and of the separation. And then we have A History of Burning, which traces a family over a century, beginning with a boy abducted from India as an indentured servant and brought to Kenya, and then their story there of being Indian in Kenya, and then eventually coming to Canada and the experience of generations. And we really see the impact of racism and colonialism on a family throughout generations. Those are 10 books that I think should be included on this list because they are epic and amazing. And yeah, some nonfiction, some fiction, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this very long video. I'm already sad about all of the editing that I'm going to do.